Hello everybody and welcome to, I believe it's the 7th edition of Jan's Opening Clinic, where you guys can ask me your opening questions and I will do my best, or close to my best, to answering them. It's a very warm day in Hamburg, so forgive me sweating already, but let's hope we make it through the show. For starters, let's get a sound check out of the way. I'm keeping half an eye on the chat, so if anybody can tell me if you can hear me, see me, all of that, please do, and I'll be delighted to continue the show. In the meantime, I'll drink my coffee. Maybe no one's watching. It's a lovely Friday evening. Who knows? Can't see myself. That's bad news already. It does say we're streaming live.
Drink my coffee.
Oh, now I can hear myself. That's great news. Let's switch that off. Anyway, seems like we're on and running, so let's jump right into it. By the way, I think you know the rules by now, but please post your questions in the news article that is released like a day prior or on the morning of this show. I'll go through the questions from the news article. I can't answer questions that are posted in the chat because then it can get a bit out of hand. But we do have plenty of good questions in the article, so I'm looking forward to that one, and let's get right to it. Mr. Kursu123 is saying, "Hi Jan, what are the critical ideas in the Maron for black? And for white? Can you also give us the opening moves? Thanks in advance, DP." Having a bit of a deja vu, didn't you ask that exact same question in the last show? Maybe you didn't, maybe it's me slowly losing my mind. But after nervously clicking here for a while, we will get to that. So the Maran, I'm not 100% sure what you mean by it. I'm assuming the opening you mean is the one after d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, e6. This is what we call the semi-Slav. Then e3, knight bd7, and bishop to d3, d takes c4. This is typically referred to as the Maran. Nowadays the move queen c2 is more popular than bishop d3. This is one of the, whatever I think you call them, anti-Maran lines. But bishop d3 characterizes the Maran, and here black very sharply gives up the center and tries to expand on the queen side, hoping in the future to get in c5 and activate his pieces that way. White's main move is bishop to d3, and already here black faces a very big choice, which is why I always struggle with explaining the main ideas of this and that. The main ideas are very different. Black has a huge choice here between a6, bishop to b7, and bishop to d6, even b4 being a move as well. And all of these lines are a bit different. The most classical is a6, intending to go c5 right away. White typically counters that by playing e4, gaining space in the center. And then after c5, white has a choice between e5, which I consider the critical move, or d5. After e5, things can get very crazy very quickly. C takes d4. Knight takes b5, believe it or not, is the main line here. And once again, black faces a huge choice between a takes b5. This is what Anand did against Kramnik in their World Championship match twice in Bonn 2008. Castles, queen b6, queen e2, bishop to b7 with very, very sharp play after bishop b5. I think white is better here, but this, is still a hot line and can be discussed. Black also has other options after knight takes b5, for example. Knight takes e5 is a move, knight takes e5, a takes b5. So you can see it already heats up very, very quickly. There's some slower options a little bit. Bishop b7, as I mentioned, is a move. Then white once again faces a huge choice between e4, a3, and castles. All of those leading to quite different play. So, long story short, there's a lot to know and a lot of theory, and you have to choose your lines there. There is no one main idea. The main idea is getting in c5, but under what circumstances you can do that or can't do that is very, very hard to, come up with a formula. In general, if it works, you should go c5 in these positions. But all of this stuff, is very, very sharp. Castles, c takes d. Once again, white has a choice between rook e1 and knight takes d4. So there is a lot to learn. The arguably most solid line is the move bishop d6 here, with a slightly different idea. It's intending to meet e4 with e5 normally. But this can also lead to a tremendous body of theory. The main discussions nowadays are in lines like this, a3. Here Anand played the spectacular game against Aronian with rook c8, knight g5, c5. So long story short, the Maran is a very complicated opening that gives black good counter chances. And the frustrating thing as a black player is after you spend all this time analyzing it, most of your opponents will play queen c2 here, which leads to much slower play after bishop d6. Then they'll play b3 or bishop d3, and it leads to a slightly more dull game, I would say. Or not dull, but more positional game. So that's the Maran for you. I hope that answered your question. I do believe I did the same thing last week, but I do have the memory of a goldfish, so I can't be 100% sure. We'll get to the next question in 1 minute. I gotta do a thing here. If I manage to. Here we are. So let's see the next question. Hochjoch is asking, Hi Jan, I have a question about a line in the Queen's Gambit. After d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6, cd, ed, bishop g5, c6, e3, bishop f5, queen f3, bishop g6, bishop f6, queen f6, queen f6, gf6. The position is considered to be very good for white. Could you explain how white can try to spoil the black setup? Thanks. I do disagree quite strongly, or not quite strongly. I do agree that this line you're talking about was considered to be quite good for white. Why is this never working? Here we go. Sorry, this is still the old line. So d4. So many lines in here. I actually do prepare for these shows, so I always gotta navigate them and find the position you were talking about. d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6, cd, ed, bishop g5, c6. And yeah, this line with e3, bishop f5 was considered to be good for white like, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. But fashion has changed. Kramnik is playing this with black. A bunch of other guys, Andreikin, have been doing very well here with black. In my opinion is that white has absolutely nothing in this, or very, very little in this endgame after queen f3. Which is why nowadays most players don't allow it by go queen c2 here. So after e3, bishop f5. Queen f3 looks like a funny move, but in general you want to punish black for getting out his bishop so early. If you play something normal here, I don't know, knight f3, knight bd7, followed by bishop e7 and castles, and black is totally fine with his bishop outside of his pawn chain. So queen f3 is the critical move, bishop g6, bishop f6, queen f6, queen f6, gf. But practice, in my opinion, has shown that black is doing alright here. These pawns aren't very pretty, but they're also very hard to really attack. Black has a pretty simple plan of getting his pieces out. Normally this knight is maneuvered to d6 one way or the other. The bishop either goes to e7 or even to b4 to exchange itself. And white has struggled to get anything here. Main tries have been h4, when I think black should go h6, even though you could also make a case for h5. Or the most topical line is knight f3, knight d7, and knight to h4, trying to build up slowly here with g3, and then sometimes f4, or sometimes trying to take over the center with f3, e4. But here, for example, the game Kramnik played against Ding Liren, he went bishop e7, just keeping an eye on this h4 knight in case of f4. Maybe he wants to go f5 in some lines even, and after g3, this is typical, he went for this knight maneuver, brought the knight around, and Kramnik had very little trouble holding that game. He set up this position, which is quite a typical sort of fortress in this line. The knight on d6 controls everything. And, well, they moved around for a couple moves, and the game ended in a draw. So I do think that this line is quite solid for black, and I do believe that if white wants to fight for an advantage, he should try to move queen c2 here, stopping bishop f5. And now it's not so easy to get bishop f5 in. If you try g6 here, e3, bishop f5, then queen b3 is very unpleasant, because you can't meet it with queen b6, since now f6 would be on priest. Anyway, stay tuned for details on this. This might be part of my black repertoire series against 1d4. I believe this is pretty solid for black, but practice, of course, can change my mind. For now, I don't see any particular problems, and I would advise white to stay away from this. Hope that answers your question, or at least I do disagree with your with your conclusion that white is much better there. Who do we have next? Mr. Spills says, hey Jan, my question is about the position after d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, knight f3, b6, g3, bishop b7, bishop g2, which seems to be strangely neglected by theory. I've read many Nimzo-Indian books, but have never seen this position examined, yet people play this against me all the time. How would you proceed with black? I'm surprised people play this against you all the time, because I do agree it's neglected by theory, but I think it's neglected for quite good reason. So let's bring the position up. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight to c3, bishop to b4, knight to f3, b6. I like this move. I also consider it the best move. And now the move g3. This is indeed not very common here. The normal moves are bishop g5 or queen c2 or queen b3 or e3. But g3, bishop b7, bishop g2 does look natural. However, black has a very comfortable version of this classic Nimzovich idea of doubling the white pawns here. If you take on c3, b takes c. Black in other lines, normally he doesn't get his bishop opposing this bishop and giving white these weaknesses. And here white finds it very tough to make use of the fact that black gave up his two bishops and has a bit of a space disadvantage in the center. So long story short, I think black is very fine here. How often have I said long story short today? 3 times in like 2 answers? That's too much. Still castles, black should go d6, put his knight to d7. And these positions you typically see with the white queen on c3 and the white pawn structure intact, where even there you could argue black is fine, but there at least white has something to play for. While here, with his double pawn, I don't think white has anything at all, and I'd rather be black. So I'm surprised people play this against you all the time. And yeah, I don't see any particular problems, because I don't see a particularly good plan for white here. The typical plan would be something very slow, like rook e1, bishop f1, knight d2, and e4. But I'm not even sure white is on time to get this in. Bishop f1, for example, here, knight to e4 looks like a good move. And yeah, I really like the black position. Put the queen on e7 if you need to, go f5, but also the positional plan with c5, rook ac8 is always there. So I think black is doing very well here. And it's for a reason that this plan with g3 in this particular position is not very popular. Can get confusing, because after c5, for example, g3 is the absolute best move, but then things really change. If black tried b6, bishop g2, bishop b7 here, white, for example, has a move like d takes c5, blowing open the position, and this is a very different story. But in the move order you gave, I don't think black has anything to fear at all. So yeah, just take on c3, go d6, knight bd7, take it from there. Who is next? Mr. Moriarty. What's he saying? He's saying, hi Jan, a recent game from the US Women's Championship between Irina Krush and Victoria Ni caught my eye because it had an unusual opening. Began d4, g6, c4, bishop g7, knight c3, c5, d5, bishop c3, b takes c, and f5. I hadn't previously been aware that this was a possible opening. It is. If you were white, how would you proceed here? If I was white, I wouldn't allow this. Actually, I played this line a lot in my, not so much in my childhood, in my junior years when I was like 15, 16. I was always hoping to get this with black, because I really like black's position, and I haven't changed my opinion on that. However, I don't think that black should build his opening repertoire around it, because it's very hard to get this position, and most players are aware of it, or at least for me it wouldn't be worth having this as a part of my opening repertoire and gambling on it if I don't want to play the King's Indian anyway. Because after c4, bishop g7, there's some easy ways to avoid this. What I normally do is go knight f3 here, then after c5, well, you can go d5 and there's no bishop takes c3, or you can go e4 and play some sort of Maroczy. So black has to do something else typically. They go d6 or knight f6. Of course, this could be a repertoire problem for you if, for example, you want to play the same-ish against the King's Indian after knight c3, knight f6, e4, d6. You want to play f3 or whatever, bishop e2, bishop g5, f4. then I wouldn't advise to go for this. In that case, I would go for the move e4 here, and then after d6 play knight to c3, which, yeah, also gives black some sidelines like knight c6. That was my repertoire as a kid, but those aren't very scary. So I would avoid them, but still your question was what would I do in this position if I reached it. It does look very funny, of course, black's play, but it is pretty sound positionally. Black has a very easy plan. He wants to go d6, knight to f6, go queen to a5, and very often knight to d7, knight to b6, and attack these pawns while hindering white's initiative in the center or on the king side by putting his pawn on f5. So while normally I'm very doubtful about these setups, here I feel that black has enough counterplay. Still, if I stumbled into this position, I think white should play sharply here. Two main sharp moves are h4 or e4, and the one I prefer, or I think is the most dangerous, is gambit here, e4, f takes e, and f3. If black takes this, white develops very, very fast, takes bishop out, castles, and this is too dangerous. So normally they don't accept this and go d6, f takes e, knight f6, bishop d3. And this position is very complicated, very double-edged, but I do believe this is quite playable for white. There were some high-level games. Kazim Charnov, I think, played bishop g4 here. Wojtaszek went knight bd7. But yeah, these positions I feel like white is fighting for an advantage. So if I ended up here, I would probably go for this, but more often than not, I would not allow white to get this. Hope that answered your question. It is a cute little system if you want a very unbalanced position that is not terrible from the get-go. Satirica is next in my questions parade here. Hi Jan, what is your opinion on the Tartakovaresque b6 in the bishop f4 variation? Bishop f4 castles e3 b6 of the Queen's Gambit declined. Though less popular than c5 and the fashionable knight bd7, it has been played from time to time and might be somewhat sharper way in this complex. Trying to unbalance the game a bit more. What do you consider to be critical here? Thank you, I really like your shows. Thank you. Yeah, I think I also covered that one already. Oops, sorry. It's very hard to do all this switching between my fancy program, between the website, between me and my fancy tie. A lot of work, I can tell you. So there's always a small interruption until I have the live chess viewer, that's what we call it, ready. So in the Queen's Gambit, knight f3, d5, knight c3, bishop e7, bishop f4, castles, e3. Yeah, knight b7 is the main move here, and for good reason. I used to think b6 was an underrated move. I don't really think so anymore. It's gotten some outings also on a higher level recently, but I don't think black really equalizes here. The main and best move is just simple development with bishop d3. Magnus Carlsen tried bishop a6 here against Ding Liren, but yeah. He tried d takes c, bishop takes c4, and then bishop a6 against Ding Liren, but did not equalize after queen c2. In fact, struggled quite a bit with his weaknesses on the queen side and barely drew. I thought the main line was bishop to b7, either now or after dc, bishop c4. Tends to transpose, and now knight bd7. And I used to think that this was quite playable for black, intending a6 and c5. While I don't think it's terrible, I don't think black equalizes here. Queen e2, a6, rook fd1. The very typical problem black has, it's hard to find a square for this queen in these positions. What you want to do is get in b5 and c5, but if you do that here, let's say b5, bishop d3, c5, white keeps an initiative after d takes c, bishop takes c5, knight to e5. These positions look very innocuous, but it's slightly unpleasant to play. For example, here, queen e7. What's the precise way? Takes, knight takes, pawn to a4, b4, and knight to e4. And it always feels like black is close to equality, but he actually is worse. Like, there are these weaknesses on the light squares if you have to give up your bishop, and white has the two bishops. d6 is a bit weak. And yeah, these positions aren't so easy to play. I'm not saying white gets a huge edge or something. Anand played bishop d6 in this position, and I think he came close to equalizing. But if you can't get in c5, I think you're under some pressure. So I no longer consider it to be such a great choice. I believe that knight bd7 is the main line for a reason. Yeah, once again, my opinion might change, but for now, I don't really think b6 will get all that popular in the near future. Time to check out the chat. Anybody's listening, watching. Portis2 says it's about 35 degrees Celsius here. I drown to see Jan wearing a tie. Yeah, maybe I should get rid of the tie. It's quite warm here as well. But for now, I'll hang in there. Next question. Who we got? Chess Oh Crazy. I'm not sure that's the pronunciation. No, he's asking like... No, that's too many questions. I can only answer one per user. So I'll answer the first one. Hey Jan, what's your opinion on the piece-sack variation in the Slav, d4, d5? Let's put it on the board. Playable for black? Playable, but once again, unpopular for a reason, I would say. Hang on though, I will bring it up in my little tool. Here we are, knight c3, d takes c4, a4, bishop f5. This is the main line of the Slav. White has a choice here between e3 and knight e5. Main options, knight h4 is also playable. Anyway, knight e5, another main line, and here the fashion has shifted a bit towards knight bd7, and then knight takes c4, either queen c7 or knight to b6. Once again, I think with a reason, but I don't think this piece sacrifice you've mentioned has been refuted. After f3, bishop b4, it's very long, very direct, sharp line. Takes, bishop d2, queen d4, knight takes, queen here, bishop takes, king takes. At the moment, black has 4 pawns, but he normally will lose this one. King c2, knight to a6, knight takes c4. And yeah, I spent some time, quite some time actually, on these positions for both sides. I was curious. I don't think black fully equalizes, but I also don't think it's that easy to play with white. So it might be a better practical weapon than a theoretical weapon. Analyzing with a computer, I was struggling at least to equalize for black here. The trendy move is castles, then white goes queen to e5, trying to get rid of the queens. Black has a choice. Pretty much every rook move you could make a case for here. Rook e8, rook d8, rook ab8, f6. f6 was the latest outing from our friend Paco Vallejo, who played this with black and won a nice game. I'm not 100% sure what he had in mind. After queen d5 cd, his opponent played knight a5, and he was fine. But knight d6, I believe, asks some tougher questions, which is why normally they don't start with f6, but with rook fd8. And here, well, there's tons of theory, but I don't know how black fully equalizes. Here things changed a little bit. White got bishop e2, and with the rook on d8, now knight a5. Makes a bit more sense. You can't go to d6 anymore. So this is the starting point for analyzing. What do they do here? Rook dc8? I think that's something very sharp like this. And yeah, computer-wise speaking, I don't think black is supposed to be fully equal here, but humanly it is kind of tricky to play with white, and at least as a surprise weapon or for 1 or 2 games, I believe black can do this. When I was checking it, I couldn't fully equalize with black, so I'd rather be white in this mess. But once again, it's not a line that is supposed to be bad. For now, I would be leaning more towards the alternatives I mentioned, like knight bd7, or even this e6, f3, c5, as Kramnik used to play. But things could change. They always can. That's why we keep doing these beautiful shows, because chess theory keeps moving. Josep Grens. Where's Josep from? From Estonia. Interesting. He is asking, hi Jan, awesome job you're doing for the site. Much of the reason I went premium. Thank you so much. With regards to the opening clinic, where do you stand on white playing c5 in the Slav or the Caro-Kann? Very general question. A particular line of interest would be d4, c6, c4, d5, bishop f4, knight f6, e3, bishop f5, knight c3, e6, c5. You don't get that position. What kind of plan should black adopt here, and what are the downsides of white playing c5 here? I'm not sure if there's any rules of thumb for that kind of stuff. Generally, c5 becomes more of an option once black has already played a6. If black hasn't played a6, I don't typically think it's a good idea, but let me bring up your position. How do we get here? d4, c6, c4, d5, and you mentioned the move bishop f4. Problem with bishop f4, and the reason no one really plays is that black can take the pawn on c4 now, and I believe this is very fine for black. After e3, just cover it with b5. Maybe white can somehow equalize, but no more than that. So bishop f4 is not a very popular move for that reason. If you could get in bishop f4 and black was forced to go knight f6, then after e3 this would be perfectly reasonable line. Bishop f5, knight to c3, e6, and here you mentioned the move c5, which, yeah, in this particular situation wouldn't be a terrible move. I wouldn't play it. I would play queen b3 here, and then after queen b6 goes c5. Because these endgames tend to be very nice for white, who has a built-in plan with b4 and b5. While, yeah, if black has to play something else, b6 weakens his queen side, queen c8 misplays the queen, black would be in some trouble already. So this position, yeah, I think would be nice for white because of queen b3. But yeah, the position after c5, first thing you always have to be sure that b6, b4, a5 doesn't do any harm. Here it seems like white can hold his chain together with a3 and would be alright. So yeah, this looks playable. It's just a fantasy position, which you normally wouldn't get. I'm assuming black's plan would be something like knight bd7, then, well, let's say knight f3, bishop e7. We want to go h3 at some point to stop knight h5, castles, bishop e2. One plan I've seen in positions like this is to go queen c8 and then bishop d8, bishop c7. To neutralize this bishop and maybe down the line go e5. So that would be a typical plan, but once again, this position is very hard to get in practice. The most prominent position where you get the c5 structure nowadays, it's not from the Slav, but from the Queen's Gambit declined. In this position, after knight bd7, here c5 has become the main move. And white, yes, trying to squeeze black by gaining a lot of space. And there's been endless discussions here. But once again, it's very hard for me to speak in plans because it's in moves. Black can try to go knight h5 and knight takes f4 and play this position. Or he can try to go knight to e4 as Caruana has played, which is a very decent move. Or he can play the slower sort of plan with c6, b6, a5 and bishop to a6. All of those, yeah, come close to equalizing, but white has hopes for an advantage here thanks to a space advantage. So c5, good or bad, is very hard to answer. Rule of thumb is make sure when you go c5 that you don't run into b6, b4, a5, and you can go a3 here in this position. You wouldn't be able because your rook is hanging, so make sure that's not the case. And make sure that e5 is not a strong counter, like d4, d5, c4, c6. Here c5. Okay, this is a ridiculous example, but here it wouldn't be any good because of e5 or b6. So in some situations it is good. Another one is knight f6, knight f3, a6. Here c5 is one of the main moves, now that black has weakened the b6 square. But it's very hard to come up with general rules, at least for me it always is. Anyway, I hope that helped a bit, and thanks for the praise and for becoming a premium member. Bill1226 is saying, Jan, I'm a 1900 till 2000 level player who wants to continue to improve to 2200. Against d4 I have played both the semi-Slav triangle system, the Notebone, and the King's Indian as black, with the French Wiener versus e4. In your opinion, which of these two defenses would yield the biggest return on investment, ROI? is either a poker player or a stocks expert to use such fancy terminology. We're not used to that in the chess world. From deep study, since it's impractical to do both. I would appreciate your comparison versus several criteria. Oof. How much work and memory is required to learn and play these openings well? Winning chances, risk of losing. Tends to be... Normally, criteria 2 and 3 don't go so well along. Lots of winning chances with no risk of losing as black is hard to find. Anyway, so the choices between the semi-Slav, triangle, Notenboom. First of all, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Let me explain my doubts. After d4, d5, the triangle is c4, e6, knight c3, c6, and you mentioned the Notenboom, so I'm assuming that after knight f3 you want to take on c4. This is a very playable line, by the way, the Notenboom. I'm not sure black equalizes, but it leads to a sharp position with winning chances, which is not horrible, so I think it checks both of your boxes quite highly. The problem is now if you play a coward like me, I will do one of two things. Either I'll be very well prepared in this line, the 4e4 Marshall Gambit, which is a lot of work, and I think this is quite dangerous for black. So theoretically, you want to be ready for this stuff. And that's work to be done, or knight e2. The other problem is I might try to move order you and go knight f3 here. And now if you go c6, stick to the triangle, then I'll do something like queen to c2, and you don't get your favorite lines, but I have to play this position, or I might go e3, or knight bd2. All of those are quite playable. So what most people do who use this triangle, guys like Anand, is they combine it with the full-fledged semi-Slav. They play knight f6 here, and they're ready to deal with the Catalan with bishop g5. We have a question about that later, I think. And after knight c3 to play c6. So there is a lot of work there. Understanding the subtleties and often combining your triangle with other openings, like the semi-Slav, which, of course, is very big territory. e3, g3, bishop g5. All of those are, big lines to learn. And they all offer winning chances. As a semi-Slav player, over the years, for me, the frustrating thing has been this queen c2 line, which is not that scary, but it is very solid for black. And compared to that, the good thing about the King's Indian is you can play it against pretty much everything. You aren't worried about, nothing pretty much. You just play the King's Indian and you deal with that. For me, I'm not a King's Indian player. I'm not gonna become one. I don't like having a space disadvantage. And also the King's Indian has a fighting reputation, and rightly so. But it's not like you get a lot of fireworks in early. More often the struggle is sort of positional and slow. And there, to my mind, you need a lot of experience, or you need to gain a lot of experience, and not so much studying to become a good King's Indian player. We do have this series by Robin van Kampen, which I think is excellent, which gives you a good foundation. But for me, I don't know. I'm much more sympathetic to the triangle semi-Slav area, but that's more because I've played it and it's more the sort of move-by-move thing, which I enjoy, while giving the required solidity as well, which the King's Indian, you're not going to get crushed out of the opening in some theoretical lines, but you are giving up a lot of space, and you have to be comfortable with that. Of course, I'm not going to go through all the lines. Bishop e2, bishop g5, f4, f3, knight f3. There's a lot of stuff you have to be ready for here as well. There's the main lines with bishop e2. Now h3 is a bit popular. I think you can play the King's Indian if you have a good feel for the positions without knowing all that much theory, while you can't in the semi-Slav Notenboom triangle setup. But I'm more sympathetic, but that's really because I play it, and I wouldn't play the King's Indian to the semi-Slav triangle thing, because that's more move by move, concrete, while, in my opinion, more solid as well. But I think you can make a case for both. Both are very playable setups. The one problem with the triangle you have is the one I mentioned. You have to be ready for all kinds of move orders and move order trickery. You don't have that worry with the King's Indian. But I can't make that choice for you. Wherever you have better results, I think, is a pretty good indicator. Let's get to the next question. Bareilly. Is that how you pronounce it? Oops, sorry. Here we are. How can black punish white for 4b3 in Grunfeld defense? That looks like a terrible move. Why would you play b3 in that position? I'm not sure immediate punishment is coming or has to be coming, but the move just doesn't make a lot of sense. You're weakening this long diagonal where the black bishop will take up his job, and you're not getting a lot to show for it. You can fianchetto your bishop, but it's very passive on b2, blocked by this pawn. So, yeah, no need to punish, just go bishop g7. Then, well, white would probably go bishop b2 now that he's played b3. You castle, white would go e3, knight f3, and now in Grunfeld spirit, I think you can just go c5, blast it open. And I'd certainly take black already. If you're given one more move, knight f3, c takes d, let's say e takes d, then his bishop on b2 is really silly and black is a bit better. Well, if white were to take on c5, I think black has many good moves here. Queen a5 is probably good. Knight e4 seems to work as well. Yeah, black is already slightly better in all these lines, so b3 is not a line you should be worried about, but it's also not a line you're gonna see a whole lot, because it's just not a very good move. So don't worry much about it, just go bishop b7, then castle, and think if c5 works. Most of the time it will work, and take it from there. Boardkeeper is saying, "Hi Jan, general opening question for you. How do you handle unfamiliar territory?" That's why I do all this studying, to avoid unfamiliar territory. Anyway, let's say you play 1d5 against 1d4 and your opponent replies with 2b3 or some other random nonsense. What's it with the b3s today? Or later in the game if he hits you with a novelty. Do you have a few questions you ask yourself, or does your experience give you more to rely on? Neither. I don't have a formula I follow, but I think the two cases you mentioned are very, very different. One is, your opponent plays a very non-threatening move like 2b3. That I'm happy to see, because I know I already have a good position and I don't have to worry about equalizing, and he seems to be afraid of my preparation or whatever. Here, I just make moves. And probably, go knight f6, bishop b2 here, I think, but it's easy enough to play such a position without knowing anything. I'd either go bishop f5 or c5. But I understand your question is not really about b3, but about surprises in general. Those ones where white plays something random or harmless, I'm happy with. If I'm white and black plays something random, then I'm trying to punish it, because normally with black you have less margin for error or creativity. So then I would probably think and see what's wrong with this. It's a very different scenario if your opponent hits you with a novelty later in the game, which he knows, he has prepared, and you don't know. Then, that's tricky, because then you feel threatened, and especially if it's a sharp position, you have to be careful. The biggest mistake, or a big mistake I've done a lot, is to think for too long there. Think for like 50 minutes or whatever. That normally doesn't help. So, I think it's important to admit to yourself, okay, I don't know this, I'm out of book, I'm going to have to use my own head and not try to remember some stuff that might be somewhere in my notes or wherever. But just, to think for yourself, try to figure out what it's about, and to not spend more than, let's say, 20 minutes. Normally, it's like nothing good ever happens after 2 a.m. Nothing good ever happens after 20 minutes of thinking. So those are kinds of the rules of thumb. But as you know, chess is such a difficult game, and every situation is completely different, that it's very, very hard to say. But I am an opening geek, so I do put in a lot of work to avoid getting hit by novelties or surprises, and be the first one to get in the novelty or the new idea or something that my opponent might not have expected, because it buys me some more time and comfort. On the flip side, I'm not the best in the world of reacting to new situations, while players who put less of an emphasis on the opening, they're a lot more calm there and don't mind it as much. But I don't have a process or a real guideline how to deal with it. every game is different. Let's Beast has a question. Let's see what Let's Beast is asking. He's saying, hey Jan, I have a question regarding the 4f3 variation of the Nimzo Indian. By the way, does it have a name? I don't know, I just call it 4f3. After d5, a3, bishop e7, cd knight d5, e4, knight c3, bc castles. How would you recommend to proceed with white? I tried bishop c4 several times, but after the pretentious bishop h4, g3, bishop e7, for example, I really experienced some difficulties, especially keeping my pawn structure together. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. But I do believe you're starting at the wrong point. The position you're giving is already good for black. Don't go there. That's pretty much all the advice I can give. After d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, f3, d5. All this so far pretty much standard theory. a3, bishop e7. Not the main move, but a serious move that has been played a lot. Don't take on d5. This is a mistake. This is just, it's not even a choice. It's just a mistake. You have to play e4 here. This is the game. Nakamura against Carlsen and many others. And after d takes e, f takes e, black typically goes e5, or he has to go e5 to stop white from going e5. Or c5, d5 would also be good for white. So they go e5, and here after d5, white is a bit better. This is a nice position for white. Go knight f3, get the pieces out. You have a space advantage. This is good for white. Bishop c5, it was played in that game, and bishop g5. If I remember correctly, knight f3 is even stronger here. But this is the line you want to study. After c takes d5, knight takes d5, black is already totally fine, because your pawn on f3 doesn't really make a lot of sense. After e4, knight takes c3, b takes c. This looks like some sort of Grunfeld or a semi-Tarrasch, where you have made the ridiculous move f3 and the not very useful move a3. So after c5, I don't think there's any good advice. I'd take black here every day of the week. I think black's position is much easier to play. After bishop c4, I'm not sure. I'm sure there's many good moves for black here, but queen c7, for example, targeting this bishop. Now this line, it just doesn't make sense. Don't play it. Still, if you want my advice from this position, I would try to repair the damage done by f3, and I would play f4, preparing knight to f3, but I still wouldn't be happy about it at all. I don't think this is a good line, and instead of cd5, you really want to go e4 in this position. Mr. Let's Beast. K. Lamar 74, another clinic regular, is asking, hi Jan, what is your opinion about King's Indian 4 pawns attack? Thanks a lot. I used to play the 4 pawns attack a lot actually, once again in my younger years when I was more adventurous. No, I wasn't really, I just knew less. I did play that a lot. I think it's probably better than its reputation, but I also don't think it's a huge threat for black, so I don't know. I might play it once as a surprise weapon. I've certainly done that in the past, but theoretically speaking, I believe black is kind of fine. Castles, knight f3. I think c5 is the best move. Sometimes they used to go knight a6 here, but I think c5 is best, as in the diagram you gave. d5, e6, bishop e2, e takes d, c takes d. The problem from white's point of view is that both black's approaches here are fine. There's a very sharp rook e8, which leads to a sort of crazy position after e5, d takes e. Well, knight fd7 is also a playable move, by the way, but d takes e, f takes e, knight to g4. Which, fire on board, but I do believe that black is fine. They've been trying e6 takes d6 here. And it's certainly fun to analyze, and you can catch an unsuspecting opponent off guard here. But objectively, I do believe that, black should be fine here. And most of the time, you're not going to get that, but black is going to play bishop g4, the solid move you can play without knowing a lot of theory. Castles knight bd7. My problem is I also think that black is fine here, so I wasn't that tempted. I used to be a bit excited about this position, h3, bishop takes, and I had all these dreams of going g4, g5, h4, h5. but they don't really work in practice. I think black has many playable setups here. Rook e8 is probably the main move. A6 is certainly a move. Even knight e8 is playable. But rook e8 I consider the main move. And here, I don't know what to do with white. After g4, h6, h4. This is the good old plan. Black has this very strong, strange move, h5. And after g5, knight to g4. And white is a bit overextended. You can't really grab the pawn because I think black can even take here and take on e4. So this doesn't work so well for white. And else, yeah, there I've tried some quieter setups. Oops, sorry. After rook e8, I've played stuff like bishop e3 here, but black always seemed to have enough counterplay. Queen a5, b5. All these lines seem to be fine. Nowadays it looks like they're playing queen c2. But also here, I think black is alright after a6 or queen a5. So I do believe the 4 pawns attack is playable and it's sort of fun to analyze, but I wouldn't make it a mainstay in my repertoire these days because I think black is more or less fine. Still, yeah, as a surprise weapon, I might play one day. I haven't played it for a while. Why not? I do have a bit of a soft spot for it. Moving on to the next question. Oops, I keep doing this. Flow Power. Flow Power is a guy who always wants to discuss the Benko Gambit, if I'm not mistaken. Hey Jan, you finally convinced me. I won't push my pawn to d5 against the Benko. Oh, that wasn't a plan. I think d5 is a good move there. I'm just saying, yeah. It's not my cup of tea. That said, I've got a specific question about the Vaganian Gambit. If I'm not mistaken, you quite like to face this gambit with white and claim an edge for white here. Nah, I never claim anything. But yeah, I do like it. I'm a pawn up. However, what do you recommend against the line given by Boris Alterman in his Gambit Guide? Must admit I haven't read the Gambit Guide, but let's put the position on the board. Alterman gives a3, okay, having checked this with the engine cloud, castles gives white a bit edge. What would you play with white? Can you explain the position in some detail? Thanks a lot. Generally, we've checked it with an engine, and the engine gives you a big edge. That's all I need, really. I mean, like, I'd be thrilled. But still, let's put the position on the board and see what I have to say about it. c4, c5, knight f3. Here we are. Knight f3, cd4, knight d4. And we're talking about this gambit with e5, knight b5, d5. Yeah, I don't consider it to be very good, and I'm quite happy to see it, but it is playable, and I haven't read the Gambit Guide. However, I don't trust it for black. g3 is a move I've been recommending. I think e3 also leads to a white edge, by the way, but g3 I quite like. Just playing to fianchetto this bishop. Yeah, some lines here, queen b6 doesn't really equalize, and knight g4 was the question, and apparently recommended by Alterman. This is how Vaganian used to play this position, e3 and f5. Yeah, white has some moves here, but bishop e2 makes sense, just stopping f4 by targeting this knight. So it removes. In this position, I must admit, I've never analyzed it much. I know the computer already gives something like 0.80 here, and I saw no real reason to doubt him. a3 makes a lot of sense to me. In general, the setup you want is go a3, b4, bishop b2, knight to d2, and take it from there. I'm not quite sure what the recommendation by Alterman or by anybody was about playing this position. a3 looks logical. Knight b7, b4, bishop d6. Let's say knight d2. I think white is always better in these positions because you don't really have to worry about losing that pawn back. First of all, it's not that easy to get, and even if black gets it, normally you get a lot of active play. Let's say knight b6 here, bishop b2. No, I don't think black's probably not in time to take. Some bishop c4 looks nasty, followed by e4. Yeah, king h8, whatever. I guess we finally castle as well. Takes, knight to c4, and white is seriously better. So generally you don't have to worry that much about giving that pawn. And yeah, I would wait a bit with castling just to make sure these f4 things don't hit me that hard. But here, for example, after f4, e4, I don't see enough compensation. We do have a full pawn, and I'd very happily take white here. So I have to confess, I've never analyzed it in detail, and I'm sure Gambit aficionados, they will try all kinds of things. Maybe they've analyzed a5 here or whatever, but I don't believe any of it. And yeah, this is a position I'd just be very happy to play over the board after, I don't know, a5. Well, it just looks like a bad move too. Now maybe it's the time to castle or just go knight d2. I just think white is an edge because, yeah, we do have an extra pawn. Black doesn't have a lead in development or anything positionally to show for it. And to get that pawn back is not going to be so easy. And if they do, we trade it for a lead in development. So, yeah, as usual, I struggle explaining ideas. I don't believe in ideas. I believe in moves. After f4, the ideas will be very different than after knight bd7. I don't know what we do after f4, actually. Probably take the pawn. Oh, this looks like it could get interesting. But yeah, I don't believe in it either. Or b4. But as a rule, yeah, if you've checked it with the engine gives a big edge, and the eye test confirms it. That's normally as far as I need to know about openings, because there's so many lines where the engine or the eye don't give you a big edge, and that's the ones I spend more time on. Still, it's a choice. I know a lot of black players like playing this line, trying to get active counterplay, and they're welcome to keep doing so. I personally believe white is better here because we're a pawn up. Who's next? McCrowskin. McCrowskin is saying, "Hi Jan, after d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5. What is the advantage of the move 4 knight c3, allowing the semi-Slav after c6 compared to going 4 bishop f4 or 4 bishop g5 immediately? What would you recommend a semi-Slav player against these move orders?" It's a very meta kind of question. What is the advantage of the move 4 knight c3? Because if you look at this position, first move that comes to mind, or at least to my mind really, is the move knight to c3, because that's what we learn in school, right? You develop the knights before bishops, you fight for the center, you're flexible where this bishop should go to f4, g5, nowhere at all. Well, the knight always belongs on c3. So I do believe that knight c3 is the most logical move here. And then, yeah, to compare it with the moves you've mentioned, bishop f4 is a move you almost never see in this position. I'm not quite sure. I've never thought about it. I think that it's going to be concrete problems. Just d takes c4, I guess. And what can white do? Queen a4 check? Maybe you can do this there, actually. I've never given any thought to bishop f4. It looks wrong to me. c5. I think I want to go c5. Yeah, this could be a good punishment of this move. Because black isn't committed to a slow setup with bishop e7 yet. After knight c3, bishop e7, bishop f4, it's a completely different story. Then after dc5, bishop c5, this bishop would have to move twice to recapture, while here it only has to move once. And after c5, I don't know, let's say e3, even cd4 looks good for black. And then after ed4, well, any moves, knight c6 or d takes c4. The bishop in many lines can be misplaced on f4. So bishop f4 I don't think is a serious move. I think c5 is a good reply. No matter if you're a semi-Slav player or any player really, just make the best move there. And bishop g5 is a serious move, and this is indeed quite often used in order to either avoid the semi-Slav or quite often also to avoid the semi-Tarrasch or the Vienna, one of the sharp lines you don't like in this position. So this is a serious move. And yeah, as a semi-Slav player, I would go h6 here, when more often than not, or I think pretty much always, white captures on f6, queen takes f6, and now chooses a move, and this is very similar position to the one you get in the semi-Slav after knight c3, c6, bishop g5, h6, takes. Where, yeah, some minor differences. Black hasn't gone c6 yet, white hasn't gone knight c3 yet, but I don't think that difference is supposed to favor white. White normally does this to avoid different complex of openings, but this position, yeah, it's nothing special. I remember years ago, it's probably not true anymore, but I was having a conversation about this very position with Peter Heine Nielsen, who used to be Anand second at the time, and I was trying to wonder, is this something you would be afraid of or you have done work of? And he said, no, why? We got the 2 bishops with black and you take it from there. I said, wow, so you don't know anything about this? And, well, he said, no, but would you want to play this position against Viciana with white? And, yeah, they have a point. I mean, this position is something you can pretty much play by feel. I think there's some theory here. I'm not that familiar with it. Some knight bd2 has been tried. And black, I think, goes g6 or even g5, or you start with c6. So I must admit I don't know all that much about it, and it's certainly playable for white. White is not worse, but I don't think it's something to be concerned about. If you're a semi-tough player, go h6 here. If you're a Queen's Gambit player, Queen's Gambit decline player, you probably go bishop e7. If you're a Vienna player, maybe you go dc4. So it depends a bit on your type of position. But yeah, knight c3 has the advantage of being, well, arguably, if you're not a Catalan fan, the best move in the position and keeping your options open. You're not committing your bishop to g5 and you're not giving up the 2 bishops, so knight c3 will always be the main move. But bishop g5 you might see once in a while if white wants to avoid something specific. Bishop f4, on the other hand, I think is probably bad. I would have to check a bit more, but I think c5 must be a good move there. Moving on. Maybe it's time to get rid of the tie. It's really warm here. We're not used to heat in Germany. Or we're used to it for like a day, but it's been nice for a week. Well, this is very confusing. "111 Marcel is saying, hey Jan, what would you consider the critical test for white in the Catalan with 4 d takes c4 nowadays? Could you suggest a preferably sharp line for black that is more or less sound and forces white to take some immediate concrete actions, instead of just playing his usual positional schemes in order to fight for an advantage? Really appreciate your efforts. Keep up the good work. Thank you so much." As usual, you're asking for too much. It's a sharp line that is sound is tricky, but it's a topic. Oops, sorry. I really struggle with these 3 buttons I have to click here. But we'll keep practicing. Might get better around show number 25 or something. So what I was saying is, it's normally tough to find a sharp line that is sound and puts a lot of pressure on white in a solid opening like the Catalan. Still, after g3 dc4, I've asked myself the same question many times. Bishop g2. Black has a lot of systems. My honest answer is I don't like any of them. I've been working on this d4 repertoire series for black, and I've been contemplating d takes c4 and giving a sharp line here. But I can't make any of them really work. Let's give an example. Bishop d7 is supposed to be a very trendy move with a very sound idea of going bishop c6. So white is more or less forced to go knight e5, bishop c6, bishop takes, knight takes, castles, and queen to d7. This is a hot line where black castles queenside against the Catalan, and then he wants to go h5, h4, and mount a counterattack, or go e5 and counterattack in the center. So it might be something like this that you're looking for. It is certainly sharp, and white is not in his usual habitat of positional maneuvering. However, I'm not a very good salesman when it comes to lines like that. I don't think it's very good. Like knight c3, h5, b3, for example. Or not for example, I think this is actually a clever move order offering to sacrifice a pawn, and I just have a feeling that black is in more trouble than white here. So even though, these lines are, easy to recommend because they're interesting and cute and sexy, I don't think it really works. But that was just one example, wasn't really your question, but this was one I was tempted by, but couldn't get it to work. And objectively, after dc bishop g2, I think the hot discussion ground is still c5, castles, knight to c6. The problem is here white chooses the character of play. He can get an endgame where he's fine with dc5. He can go queen a4, as Karana recently did. He can go knight to e5. So this is pretty much a mainline battlefield where white chooses the action. Probably also know what you're looking for. I've always had a bit of a soft spot for the move a6, just trying to make it hard for white to regain his pawn after castles. I will play knight c6. I still think this is sort of a playable line. I'm not that happy with the position after e3, intending to go queen e2 and the main lines after b5 once again, sacrificing a pawn with b3. I believe white gets very good compensation. No, I'm sorry. Ooh, I better switch the sound off for this. Alright, all better. Sound back on. So what was I talking about? I think, yeah, here after e3, white gets pretty good compensation. And there's also after a6 the move knight to e5. But that leads to a sharper play, which might be, yeah, I think is sound for black as well after bishop b4 check. So that's more fun. But yeah, castles, here you need to have something good after knight c6, e3. I haven't really managed to find it. Yeah, so sorry, bad news. Catalan is a good opening. There's some other lines like bishop b4 check. There's many lines, and most of them playable. Bishop d2, a5, or bishop d2, even c5 has been played. But none of them are that exciting to me. So yeah, from where I'm sitting, I'm also looking. If I find a sharp sound line that poses problems after dc4, bishop g2, I'll let you know, or I'll play it at the very least. At the moment, yeah, I'm leaning more towards bishop b4 check and bishop e7, which, yeah, are less cool, but in my opinion, more reliable at this point in time. So sorry to disappoint, but yeah, the first line I gave with bishop d7 and bishop c6 in long castle, I think that's your sharp non-standard position, which will probably yield good results. I just don't think it works in the long run. Who else we got? By the way, I think, I'm not sure I've mentioned this, but this is a 1d4 edition, and so far all the questions have been about 1d4. I'll see what other topics or limitations we can come up in the future, but so far I like it, talking about d4 stuff. At least I tend to know my way around, while if you ask me a French question or a Najdorf question, I'll still give my opinion, but they tend to be a little less qualified than after d4, because most of these lines, at least, I've checked at some point. Leclou is asking, could you tell us why queen a5 instead of queen c7 is not good against the queen c2 knight f3 setup? Queen c2 knight f3 is the line I was giving in my Nimzo repertoire series. I can try, thanks. The queen is better placed on c7. That's the short answer for you. While I try to bring up the position, here we are, e6, knight c3, bishop to b4, queen c2, castles, knight to f3, c5, d takes c, knight a6. Oof, long line. Yeah, here the main move is queen c7 or bishop d6 followed by queen c7 and queen a5, yeah. It's a worse move, that's really the bottom line. The queen is better on c7, defending b7 in main lines, yeah, covering this d7 square, helping the bishop. I think both rook e1 and queen e2 are good here, but I probably go rook e1 and ask black to make a move. Because, yeah, if black does nothing, white will follow up with rook b1, once again hinting at the weakness of b7. And then bring the bishop out, and this position is quite unpleasant, so black would have to do something. Bishop d6 is a typical move. But here queen e2 seems to be quite strong, and black is not really in time to take on c3, which I assume would be the point of putting the queen on a5 instead of c7. Because after bishop f4, white just has a tremendous lead in development. There's already all kinds of tricks appearing, but in general you can always give up, or not always, often give up a pawn like this one and get a lot of compensation here, because black hasn't managed to conclude his development. The queen on c3 is bad. This position, I believe, is already sort of unplayable for black. I don't see a move. Like knight d7 doesn't work because of knight takes d7, and this bishop is hanging. Another problem of not having the queen on c7. And yeah, if you play a neutral move, let's say rook b8, there's many strong ways to proceed. For example, here, and something's gonna give. So none of this stuff really works, and if black can't take on c3, there's not much reason to have your queen on a5. Like in this position, the best move to me seems to be queen c7 back, actually. Just stabilizing the position, but then you've lost the tempo compared to the main line. So queen a5, yeah, I don't think it's such a good move. That's really all I got. Rook e1, knight d7. Once again, white just develops bishop f4. Knight e5, rook e5, hitting the queen on a5. So yeah, queen a5 is not a good move. Go rook e1 and you'll be better, which is what we hope for as a result of the opening. I hope, first of all, I hope I'm right. I haven't checked it in that much depth. And secondly, I hope that answers your question. Discombobulated is asking, "Hi Jan, I'm always trying to find new aggressive openings for black after d4. I've tried the Benoni, but black is too weak positionally. Tried the Benko, but black is a pawn down. And I'm too lazy to learn King's Indian defense theory. Any other openings I can try to get an active fighting position?" Yeah, this is sort of the usual story. Like, you don't want to study the King's Indian because it's too much work. You don't want the Benoni because you're positionally worse. But you want an active fighting position. And you don't want to be material down against 1d4, the most solid of moves. It's hard. Grunfeld is a very active opening. It's also quite some theory, but I believe we have this video series by Peter Svidler, which is supposed to be quite good. So yeah, you could give the Grunfeld a shot, or if you're looking for something more, how we call it, more lazy, then yeah, you can always go to flank openings like d4, g6. I've covered this stuff earlier, c4, bishop g7, you can go knight c3, c5, and after, yeah, let's say knight f3, d6, knight c3, you can go for something like Fabiano Caruana played against Georg Mayer, e4, e5, bishop e2, knight e7. All this stuff is not very good, but it does give you a fighting chance and an active position where you don't have to know much. The problem is, yeah, if you run into a prepared opponent who knows the stuff here, as yeah, Georg Mayer played h4 and put Caruana under a lot of pressure, then you might suffer once in a while. But it's very hard to, yeah, give you everything. Equal material, active fighting position, not having to study theory, and not positionally worse. I'm afraid I'm not sure that exists. Like, yeah, the Nimzo Indian is pretty good, the Queen's Indian, but I'm sure you know all that. Leningrad Dutch, maybe, yeah, maybe that's an opening for you. The Leningrad Dutch, it's also quite active. You have equal material. You don't need to learn any theory, just castle, go d6, queen e8, and hope to somehow checkmate. I honestly don't know. I'm not trying to make fun of the request. I want to have the same thing. I just don't think it exists. But yeah, from your list of openings, it sounds like you like your bishop on g7. So Grunfeld, Leningrad Dutch, or d4, g6 flank openings, I believe, are the next ones to try. Or maybe enjoy the, oh no, there you're also positionally worse. This stuff. Nah, probably not. Anyway, sorry I can't help. Stay tuned for my, hopefully, coming one day series against 1d4. But it's gonna be very passive and boring and a lot to learn. So probably it's not gonna be the thing for you either. It's hard to find that one. I'd go Grunfeld or King's Indian if I was starting from scratch looking for something active. Now, next we have Pramod NVS. I have this discussion with Pramod, but he doesn't seem to give in so easily. I keep telling him, ask me something more specific, not broad general questions, but I'm not making a lot of progress. He's asking, will you please tell us the advantages and disadvantages of Slav and semi-Slav defenses, and are they better than Queen's Gambit Declined? If so, why do people play Queen's Gambit Declined, even though the light-squared bishop never comes out in this opening as compared to the Slav defense? I don't know. I think, yeah, people underestimate the fact that the light-squared bishop remains locked in. And the advantages of Slav and semi-Slav are... No, semi-Slav you also lock it in. So only of Slav are that the bishop can get out indeed. But it comes at a price. d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, let's say. here you can't go bishop f5 because then after c d5, we have a question about that later, but here white is much better. Queen b3 coming up. So in order to get the bishop out, you have to give up the center, which is also not to everybody's taste. Or you go for the semi-Slav e6, but boom, your bishop is locked in once again, so you haven't accomplished your goal. And you're committed to the move c6, which you wouldn't be in the semi-Slav. Or let's say white allows you to get the bishop out, goes knight f3, knight f6, e3, you go bishop f5, then normally they will bother this bishop and go knight h4, and all of a sudden you don't have the two bishops anymore, even though you got your bishop out. Oh, I'm sorry, I should probably display all this stuff. Here we are. What went wrong? Technical problems, ladies and gentlemen. Why though? I don't understand it. Don't I have the same board open I always have open? This can only take an hour while I keep clicking random buttons. So. Now we finally made it. So what I was explaining is, yeah, in the Slav, in order to get your bishop out, you have to make concessions. After knight c3, d takes c4, you have to give up the center to get it out, which is not what everybody likes. After e3, bishop f5, you might lose that bishop, even though you just got it out. It will get exchanged after knight h4. In the semi-Slav, the bishop doesn't really get out, does it? It's still locked in. So all of those are major openings, all of those are very playable. Sometimes a bishop ends up getting out and sometimes it ends up staying on c8. If it does stay on c8, normally you don't want to go c6. Or, well, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But here it has other options like going b6, bishop b7 or to a6. Which opening is better is very much a matter of choice. You will see plenty of people at world-class level playing the Queen's Gambit Declined or the Slav or the semi-Slav, and they're all aware of the fact that you should get your big pieces out. So it's not that simple. It's not all about the light square bishop, a lot of pieces on the board. But yeah, all of those openings are playable. It's very much a matter of taste. What is going on here? Here we are. Let's find the next question. Chess Ude 98 from Norway, an international master, is saying, "Hello, Mr. Gustafsson. Nice opening clinics. You sure know what you're talking about?" Nah, I just pretend. I often meet the Moscow variation these days. I've always played the variation with bishop f6 and then rook c1 and e4 with quite decent results, but I don't feel like it's putting black under the pressure. What are the critical lines in the Moscow today? Is bishop h4 the best try? Thanks and keep up the good work. I shall try. And my answer, as usual, is I don't know. It is a matter of taste. Blah, blah, blah. So d4, d5, c4, e6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, c6. Yeah, the line you mentioned is bishop g5. I don't do this much. First of all, I'm always scared of the Botvinnik. I think the Botvinnik is pretty much out there. And I don't like to give up the bishop. Or, well, I've done this and I will do it again. But it's not ideal to take on f6. Yeah, the line you mentioned I think is fine. e3, knight d7. What do they do? Bishop d3 takes, g6, castles, where bishop g7, rook c1, castles e4. It's a playable main line, but yeah, I understand the sentiment that here after e4, e5, for example, white doesn't really get all that much or put a lot of pressure. d5, knight b6, and, well, black is quite solid here. Or instead of e5, queen e7. I was never very attracted to this line. I've played some goofy lines here, but I'm not sure they're highly recommended either. I've tried stuff like bishop b3. Then they make a move, rook d8, knight a4, stuff like this. But was it rook d8? I can't even remember. No, after queen e7, I think it was going knight a4. But yeah, nothing special. And yeah, also nowadays after DC, bishop c4, they often play bishop d6 and then queen e7, right? And I don't think white has all that much there either. Or instead of knight d7, there's this line with g6. So yeah, long story short, I don't know. After bishop h4, dc4, I think the ball is in white's court after e4, g5, bishop g3, b5. This hasn't been popular from the white side over the last couple of years, and the recent games I've seen hasn't been anything spectacular, as it happens with pretty much every line. If it's very popular at the highest level over a couple of years, then it's sort of the ideas get all shown and in the end black holes. So, well, this is playable. It's also very much a matter of taste. I only go here if I have a concrete idea, and at the moment I don't have any in these lines. So my advice would be, yeah, I normally play e3, simple as that. Knight bd7, bishop d3, and I'm not sure if that's putting maximum pressure, but I found it a better chance than the bishop g5 lines for me personally recently, but that can always change, and the semi-Slav is such a major opening that I think it helps to be flexible, and sometimes, yeah, I also twitch the move order in order to avoid it, like play the Catalan, or against the Slav play knight f3, e3. There's many options, but I don't think there's or at least I don't have a great try for an advantage here. g3 is catching a bit of momentum. Kramnik has been doing this. I think we have a question about that later. I also don't think it's that critical. But it's like that in every opening. Like, black tends to be fine, and you prepare for your opponent specifically and try to find something. But yeah, in bishop g5, I don't have any crushing ideas at the moment, I'm sorry. Christian Bench 37 is saying, hello Jan, what do you think about the following variation? d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, bishop g5. Thanks and keep up the good work. What do I think about that? I think it's not a very good move. It's not logical to me. Knight f6, bishop g5, you're gonna get hit with tempo by knight e4, and you have to move the bishop again. This knight is not misplaced on e4, and in the Trompovsky at least you can kick it away with f3, but here you already have your knight on f3, so no, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't know, I think they normally go here, then black can go if he wants to go c5, and I don't know, you get a position like this. Queen b6 is by no means the only move. Bishop f5 looks good too. But queen b6, for example, queen b3, c4. This seems to be fine for black. And bishop h4, I guess you could also go here. Well, black can also go c5, I would guess. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me to move bishop g5 in that position. If you want to do it, then do it a move earlier. But even then, don't do it. I was going to say here, but this also, yeah. It's a sideline, but not that good. The only good bishop g5 is the one against the Trompovsky. This is the Trompovsky. This is a playable move, of course, but all the others I don't have much faith in. Moving on to the next question by Mr. Portis Dos. Hi Jan, I think there is a line against Queen's Gambit declined where white is castling long. It seems risky and aggressive. Could you show us what are the ideas of this line? Thank you very much. I'm not sure which line you mean, but I will certainly try to figure it out. Or, well, I know some lines where white castles queenside. There are quite a few, but I'm not sure which is the one you have in mind. The main one that comes to mind is this one after c5. Nowadays, as I mentioned earlier, knight b7 is the main move, and with good reason. But here there's some sharp lines where, how does it go? Queen c2, queen a5, a3, knight c6, castle queenside here, for example. This used to be popular a couple of years ago. Nowadays, white doesn't do it anymore because there's more promising lines than this one. But it's still interesting. After bishop e7, white used to go g4 here. And this, yeah, was considered to be very cool, but nowadays it's more or less been solved with the help of our computer friends. Something like this leads to an equal position. Takes, how does it go? Knight d5, knight e7. There were some theory discussions here many years ago, Now this is kind of fine, while after bishop e7, h4 came to the forefront a bit instead of g4, so this pawn isn't the target. But black is also doing well here after a6, so rook to d8. So I'm not sure if this is the line you meant. This one I believe is considered to be fine for black. After e3, knight bd7, there was also, well, it's not seen very often, but theoretically after c5 you could also castle queenside here. This has been played once or twice. But yeah, I don't think this is very good either, unfortunately. The white king is just kind of exposed here. And yeah, even a move like a6 intending to go b5 looks pretty decent for black to me. So most of the time the king is better off on the king side, but I'm not quite sure if those are the lines that you did have in mind, so sorry if you were thinking of something else. As a rule, yeah, castling queenside in the Queen's Gambit tends to not go so well. Next question by Capilano Bridge. Hi Jan, can you tell me a defense against d4 as black, where if I prepare well in detail, I can obtain the most advantage out of it? For example, if I'm very well prepared in the King's Indian and the Nimzo, which one will I gain more from against a normal d4 playing opponent? Similar question to the one we had earlier, right? Where, yeah, about the Semi-Slav or the King's Indian. I don't know, it's very hard to say. It also depends on your style. To me, the opening that probably rewards preparation the most is the Grunfeld, because it's very move by move, and if you study a lot and really understand the lines, then it helps. With the Nimzo, while there's also a lot of theory, first of all, the Nimzo, I think most people understand this, but the Nimzo itself is not a complete repertoire. You need to combine the Nimzo with something. After d4, knight f6, c4, e6, you will face knight f3 just as often as you will face knight c3. So you have to, sort of have your repertoire ready here, combining with d5 or with b6 or with bishop b4 check. So this complex gets quite big. Typically, it's supposed to be that you can play this with less theory knowledge than, for example, the Grunfeld or the Semi-Slav, but it pays to know your stuff in every opening. So I struggle to give the right answer to that one. I think the Grunfeld is a great opening. I think the King's Indian in the right hands, it can be a good opening as well. It's not for me. I think in the King's Indian, it's more about experience and having a touch for these positions than, about move-by-move knowledge, even though move-by-move knowledge certainly helps as well. So for the ones that, reward move-by-move knowledge the most, I would say it's probably the Grunfeld and maybe the Semi-Slav, this territory we touched on earlier. But, prepare can mean many things, so it's very hard for me to give good advice there. And for me it's a quest against 1d4 to find the right opening. I'm also struggling. I'm working on my video series right now, which is based on putting your pawn on d5 against pretty much everything, playing the Queen's Gambit declined, or not really the Queen's Gambit declined, but putting the pawn there and then dealing with the Catalan with all kinds of openings there. And I think preparation is tremendously important there as well. Or, like in the Vienna, for example, which I'm contemplating dc4. It's a very dynamic line. So preparation always helps no matter what you play. Else, find a line that suits you. I think, Grunfeld is the one where, you want to put in your time and then you will reap the rewards, in my opinion. Another question by Capilano Bridge, but I'm sorry, I can only answer one per member, so I think you're lucky and someone else asked the same thing, and we'll get to that later. Sylvester Brett number 1 is saying, Hi Jan, could you show some good lines which don't require exhaustive study versus either the Chigorin or the Tarash? Once again, I can only answer one of those, but I think I've shown my thoughts what to do against the Chigorin in an earlier edition, so check that out. And I'll briefly show the Tarrasch. Maybe I've shown that as well, but never mind. So the Tarrasch is the position after d4, d5, c4, e6, let's say knight c3, c5, cd, ed, knight f3, and yeah, here black should go knight c6, knight f6 is not very good because you get pinned with bishop g5 and this is unpleasant. And knight c6, yeah, well, I have some solid lines out after g3, which I'm quite happy with. But recently dc5 has come to the forefront, and I think it's a very good move. It's very solid, very easy to play for white, and it's a problem for Tarrasch enthusiasts. Knight f6 is not very good because white just keeps his pawn with bishop e3. So black more or less has to go d4, knight a4. Here bishop takes c5 is the only move that really works, a little trick to win the pawn back. But now after queen a5 check, I believe both queen d2 and bishop d2 give white a pleasant little edge with the two bishops without having to know too much. I'm not saying white is winning here. It typically leads to some endgames where black has decent chances of equalizing. Check queen d2, for example, takes. I don't even know. I can never remember how it goes. King takes, I think. And white is slightly better, but I'd play this position anytime you do have the two bishops slight lead in development, so I believe this is a very easy way to meet the Tarrasch. We don't have to learn that much. Nothing wrong with g3 either, but dc5 is sort of very fashionable, and I think with good reason. David02 is quoting a question I had earlier. I answered it earlier, so scroll back to my earlier answer, David, to see your quote met. David02 also has another question. Well, the last one wasn't really a question. I'm not sure if this one is joking or not, though. Jan, can you show us the Nimzo with white and black, please, with a couple of exclams? What do you want me to show you? I am not quite sure what to show and how. The Nimzo is a big opening. It's very playable with white, very playable with black. I made a repertoire series for white based on the move queen to c2. But queen to c2 is not the only move, while I once again try to open the board here. So I'm not quite sure what I can tell you in these 3 minutes that I'm going to spend on the question. Nimzo is a very good opening. It's very sound. You pin the knight. You're keeping your options open as how you want to deploy your pieces. If you want to go castle and play in the center, or if you want to go b6, bishop b7, if you want to take on c3 or not. And yeah, it's one of the main lines and always will be one of the main lines. White has a choice between the moves queen to c2, which I made a repertoire series about, the move e3, the classical Rubinstein move intending to either go knight e2 or bishop d3 and develop his pieces and slightly delay the action. The very sharp f3, which has become fashionable when play really heats up after c5, d5, b5, for example, or after d5. We've had a question about that earlier. White can also play knight to f3, normal developing move, when black can go d5, c5, b6, or castles, all of those main lines. And yeah, white can also play other moves. Bishop g5 is a move, a3 is a move, g3 is a move, queen b3 is a move. In general, the Nimzo is a very sound opening, and it will always be a very sound opening and always make a very important part of people's repertoires. Because as I just mentioned, it's not a whole repertoire. You have to be ready for knight f3 or g3 here as well. Or people starting the game with one knight f3, or if they're even more evil, with one c4, trying to move order you out of the Nimzo. But as a part of the repertoire, the Nimzo will always have its place, and people will always try to fight against it with white too, so I'm expecting it to stay. I hope that taught you everything you need to know about the Nimzo Indian, while I'm still very confused for what's going on here. Dr. Boki is asking, what do you recommend after d4, knight c6? Is there a way to play it safe with white? Keep up the fantastic work on Chess24. Thank you. By the way, what happened to the Promise series on the exchange Slav for white? Yeah, that series is not gonna happen. I was looking at the exchange slab. I got too bored of it. I don't have any fresh ideas. It's not happening. I'm not a fan of the exchange Slav anymore. I'm abandoning the exchange Slav ship. Sorry, guys. Anyway, getting to the question. d4, knight to c6. I've never given much thought to this. Probably d5 is good for white. Like this, I will say instinctively. I've never faced it, and I don't think Dr. Boki is gonna face it all that often, so it's nothing to worry about. I'd probably be lazy about it and transpose to the Chigorin. So someone just asked about the Chigorin. I played this line anyway with d5, c4, bishop g4, knight c3, and I guess that's what I would do if I was faced with d4, knight to c6. Here, yeah. Takes, bishop to f4 is what I've normally been playing when white has a pretty small but pretty safe advantage. Bishop g3, e3, bishop e2, castle, whatever. White is a bit better, so I'd probably be lazy and do that. But if I had to prepare and I saw my opponent always goes knight c6, I don't know anybody in the world who does that, but then I would probably investigate a line like d5, knight e5, e4, and expect to see good results here as well. But yeah, I'd go knight f3 and not worry about it. I'm sure something like this is also playable, but I probably wouldn't do it because this looks like the sort of thing that one knight c6 players do want if there's many of them out there. So yeah, I'd go knight f3 and then c4 and take it from there, transpose to the Chigorin. That's very safe and very easy to play. Oh, we have a question by a Grandmaster. Federico Perez Ponsa is saying, "Hi Jan, what do you think of the knight e5 line in the Catalan, which was played a lot recently? Which move do you think is more dangerous, knight a3 or queen c2? I feel white always gets an edge, even though computer says it's close to equal. Thanks in advance." This is a topic I know a lot about because I've just been working on it for my... I've done a video from the black side for my repertoire series against 1d4. So I'll give you a little sneak preview. And yeah, since I've been looking at it from the black side, of course, all I have to say is that black is fine in all the lines. While my cell phone is ringing, but I'm gonna have to ignore that and call back, I guess. So the position after d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5, g3, bishop e7. I think, yeah, it's not a very sexy line, bishop e7, but it is very, very solid, and it's the main line at top level at the moment for a good reason. Knight e5 has been popular because white is struggling a bit after queen c2, a6 to find anything. So they've tried this. Knight c6 might look like a funny move, but it's been the main line for a long time. Even though I don't think c5 is as bad as people say it is. But yeah, knight c6 looks funny, but it's an established way to get your pieces out. And white has been trying this brave bishop takes, queen takes e7. And here, yeah, there's a choice between queen a4, knight a3, or queen c2. The question was if I think knight a3 or queen c2 is better, so I'll limit myself to those. I don't know, I think the latest fashion is this, but there's nothing here for white either. Rook to d8. Now if knight takes c4, there is c5, so white normally goes queen to c2. Now black plays bishop a6. This is a very precise move. If you go c5, then dc5, then I agree, white is a bit better. But bishop a6, this is an equalizer. Knight takes c4 and c5. And there's nothing here. Takes, queen takes, b3, bishop takes c4. Black wins his pawn back on c4. And the game is gonna end peacefully. So I don't think white has anything here. But how do I put my phone on silent? Please I don't get forfeited during these shows if my phone rings. Instead, queen c2. Yeah, queen c2, this is sort of the evolution of queen a4 after queen a4, e5, d e5. Black has been doing well, so Kramnik came up with this queen c2, e5, rook to d1 idea, but I think it's also nothing. Here you have to be precise and follow our friend Wei Yi. I believe he was the one to show the way here, knight c3, queen d7, this is very clever, or I think he played queen e6, but it has the same idea. D takes e, and queen to h3, and once again, white is nothing. f3 runs into knight g4, and if e4, knight g4, f4, rook a d8, it turns out that black is very comfortable. So, yeah, I think both moves are nothing. I think black is fine there, but I've just been working on it quite a bit, and I might be biased, but I don't think so. For details, check out my upcoming series, Black Repertoire against 1d4. Catalan is probably going to be part 2. Maybe I'll make it part 1. I've just been spending a lot of time on this. But yeah, my honest opinion is black is fine in both these lines. And my honest opinion is I still don't know which button to click here, which how hard can it be? Robin Nielsen 94 says, "Hi Jan, great work you're doing for Chess 24. Thank you. I'm sweating wearing a tie here. That's what I'm doing for Chess 24. They're not requiring me to wear a tie, so I probably shouldn't have done it today. I was wondering how a Grunfeld player should approach 1 d4, 2 knight c3 in Grunfeld fashion. You go d5, no matter if you're a Grunfeld player or a King's Indian player or a Nimzo Indian player. In that position, you want to play 2 d5. That's pretty much all I got to say, but let's bring it up. d4, knight f6, knight c3. White is sort of threatening e4. If you go c5, he goes d5. If you go g6, he goes e4. So you can't do that. So the move to play here is d5 if you're a Grunfeld player or any other player. And the good news is you already have an equal position after 2 moves because his knight on c3 is misplaced. Now yeah, there's some moves here. Bishop f4, this is the Jobava line. I believe c5 is totally fine for black. Then after e3 you take, and a6, followed by knight c6. And yeah, I don't think it matters if you're a Grunfeld player or not here. This is just the way to play, and I would strongly recommend doing that. Bishop g5 is also a move. Here black has a bit more choice. I believe knight bd7 is decent. I believe the direct c5 also should work here. Sort of a reverse Chigurin, but I don't see a way for white to exploit that. Yeah, I would probably go knight bd7 here though. Then, well, some theory, but not much. Queen d3 is a funny move. You sometimes see it, and c5 is fine for black. f3, this is a line from my childhood. c6, e4, takes, e5. And black is better. D takes e, queen to a5. But yeah, do that. I believe it's as simple as that. This is the way to equalize, which is the main goal in the opening, or the way to get counterplay. And yeah, if you're a Grunfeld player, it doesn't really matter for the context. I'm assuming you're not a modern player. If you're a Pirc player as well, you can of course do this. But even if I was a Pirc player against e4 and my opponent went d4, knight f6, knight c3, I played d5 here all day long because I think it's by far the best move. Big Chicken. Hi Jan, I don't like to play in the Benoni structures. Early c5, like 1 d4 c5, or later c5, like d4, knight f6, c4, c5. Is there a simple or easy to learn setup against the Benoni stuff? Thanks, and keep the site running, it is really great. Thank you. Cheers, Andre. There's no easy way, there never is, but yeah, what I do is, if my opponent plays Benoni or Benko and I'm not in the mood for it, I don't allow it. So I'm not sure how easy, but my approach is typically to not even go 1 d4 against Benoni players, to go 1 knight f3, and they can't get their Benoni structures no matter what they do. If they go c5, I'll go c4, knight f6, And now, yeah, sometimes I go d4 here, which of course transposes to d4, knight f6, c4, c5, knight f3. But you can also go knight c3. So that's what I do against Benoni guys if I'm not in the mood for a Benoni. Else, yeah, if you play d4 after knight f6, c4, c5, you can always play knight f3. We've discussed this earlier. If they go 1 c5, yeah, then, well, if you're really desperate to avoid a Benoni structure, you can go c3 or even d takes c5. It's not such a ridiculous move here. Tending e6, knight c3, bishop c5, knight e4. And white is arguably a bit better here, actually. Knight e7. Can't speak anymore. Bishop e7, knight d6. So all of this stuff is possible, but in general this is the version of the Benoni you should be least afraid of, to go d5 here, because you're not committed to c4 yet. So let's say knight f6. Here white can, and in my opinion should, play with knight c3, leave this square open for a knight in the future after e4, knight f3, and so on. But yeah, if you don't like Benoni structures, you should strongly consider opening the game with 1 knight f3 or 1 c4 against guys that could potentially play the Benoni. And yeah, for me this has worked quite well, because they tend to be less comfortable on that turf. Doing overtime again. I thought limiting it to d4 would make us go through this a bit faster so I can go to the movies later, but there are still a lot of questions to answer. Prousty Keen, I might take a shortcut here. Hi Jan, it's hard to find a route to even a slight advantage against the Semislav-Maran complex. What do you think is the most promising try for now? Yeah, we've had the same question earlier by Chess Ude. I honestly don't know. I tend to go e3 and bishop d3 against the Maran. I think there's still some chances there. 5g3 I haven't studied much, but I think it's an interesting try as well. And yeah, I think we all have the same problem. You can also try to avoid it by playing a different move order. But it's a pretty solid opening. What can I say? In Norway chess, Anish Giri tricked MVL into this semi-Slav, and MVL wasn't ready for it, and he had to go for a quick draw after losing to Topalov earlier. So no one really knows. I don't have a refutation. I would tell you guys. I don't. Sorry. Passion, I am, is saying, if you had a year to prepare a defense for d4 with the purpose of holding draws as black, what would you choose and why? No, I think every mainline defense is fine. Be it the Grunfeld, be it the Nimzo, the Queen's Gambit, the Slav. I would probably go, this is the repertoire series I'm going to come out with for the Queen's Gambit declined. Because, I think it's quite solid. I think the trend is in our favor there, with Kramnik and some other guys showing the way. And that's probably what I would do. But chess is like that. You sometimes need something fresh, and if these guys prepare for a World Championship match, you see people coming up with many different things. We've seen Gelfand come up with the Grunfeld, we've seen Vishyanan come up with the Semi-Slav, we've seen Magnus Carlsen. Well, he wasn't that impressive against 1d4, but playing the Queen's Gambit and playing those complexes. So I don't think there's an answer for that. I think all the big openings are fine, but I don't think I could solve them to a draw if I had a year. I'll try though with my repertoire series. Stay tuned for that. Enough plugging. I honestly don't know. I probably go for the Queen's Gambit declined, and there, either the Vienna or the Ragozin, and the mainlines against the Catalan. Pasili is saying, hi Jan, what is your opinion about the King's Indian exchange variation? I like positions without queens and the black attack on the king side, but most people say it is a bad opening. I don't think it's that great. I wouldn't play it. It's not bad, and I might not be aware of some ideas there because I haven't looked at it for a long time. But it is a little bit anti-positional, because you're giving up this d4 square and you're not getting the d5 square in return, because black can still go c6. Having said that, there are always some questions to ask here after bishop g5. I think the best move to play for black is rook to e8. All the other lines, there might be some hope. Here knight d5, knight takes, pawn takes. At least you repair your structure. But after c6, I think black is more or less bound to equalize here. This is, yeah, it's not terrible. And if you're well prepared in the king's, what's it called? The exchange variation of the king's Indian, I think it can be done, but I wouldn't put all my eggs in that basket. Knight bd7 is a move here when I don't even know what do they do. I think long castles and well, in those lines I saw some chances, but rook e8 seemed to be a very solid move to me. There's also knight to d5 here, takes, pawn takes, but then c6, and yeah, I think white also has nothing here. The line I used to play a bit, which I thought was a bit slightly more interesting version, was castles, knight c6, and now d takes e5. And after d takes e, bishop g5. It's also nothing special, but with the knight already committed to c6, I thought there was a bit more intrigue in this line than in the other one. But I also gave it up a long time ago. I think black is fine here as well after takes and bishop g4, amongst other things. I think Robin in his series he gave something else. He recommended knight to d4, knight e5, knight e6, some sharp stuff, which probably also equalizes. So, yeah, the problem is it doesn't fit with having played c4 already to take on c4 and e4 to take on e5. If you're looking for quite a play, then maybe try setups with knight f3, g3. In those lines it's often fine to take on e5. The king's Indian exchange, well, it's not as bad as people think if you don't use it to play for a draw, because there it's really not very well suited to exchange pieces since you have this weakness on d4. But if you go takes, takes, and bishop g5, and know your theory here, I think it's sort of playable, but after rook e8, I don't know any way to gain an advantage, so I would not do it. SD Bates is saying, "Hi Jan, I finally decided to become a premium member just so I can ask you vague and annoying questions. Appreciate it. Here's my question. How would you counter or handle the stonewall setup as black?" That is a very strange question indeed. I don't understand it. The stonewall setup, isn't black the one who plays the stonewall normally? How would I handle it as black? I'm looking for a line I can play against the setup as black. And why don't we see the stonewall attack more often in high-level games? It seems so easy to play with white. I'm not sure I get it. So you mean white plays a stonewall, white plays f4, d4, and so on and so forth. I don't know. I'd be thrilled if they did that more. I've never thought about it. And yeah, what's the move order? Like, how will you get there? d4, let's say I go d5, which I don't have to, of course. No, that's the first problem. I really don't know how to get there. Maybe you start with f4, knight f6, knight f3, d5, and now you play e3. Yeah, here of g6, white could play d4. But in general, playing black openings with white tends to be, or this sort of ready-made setup tends to be not a very good idea. In the stonewall, not even a stonewall player would claim that they're better once they set up the stonewall. And to play that with white would not be playing for an advantage. It would just be, system play. And I'm not sure how you would get it. Like here in this position, for example, from the black perspective, positions look very different. Bishop g4 looks like a good move to me. You could play d4 here, but e6, do you really want to play, I don't know, c3 here? Like, if you look at this from the black side, to me it feels like black is already better. And as long as black gets his bishop out, I don't think this is very desirable. I would sort of agree if, black played e6, then this is probably playable. But in this position, well, I'm not sure what move order you would use, or maybe you have something specific in mind, but I'd be thrilled if the whole world would start trying to get the stonewall with white with d4, f4, e3. Also, if you start like this, or even if you start like f4, and I know you want to set up the stonewall, I'm not forced to commit to d5, right? If you do something like this, I can probably play with d6, c5, or d6, knight bd7, and prepare e5. So I don't know. I'm sure there's some experts that use this to play bullet every game and are very happy with themselves, but I don't think it's a real world problem. And I'd be thrilled if people did that. Just don't go for a d5, e6 and lock your bishop in on c8, because that could be a problem, but else I'm not expecting an epitome of guys trying to set up the stone wall with white. I'm sorry, I might have misunderstood the question, but you mentioned yourself. The question is a bit vague and a bit annoying, so it does get the appropriate response. No offense meant, of course. Tony Rowe is asking, hi Jan, what is your opinion on the g3 gambit line in the Semislav Kramnik played against Giri and Anand at the Gashimov Memorial? The line goes as follows. Yep, I know. And then we're quoting the Anand Kramnik game. I basically agree with everything you're saying. And yeah, this line, it seems to be getting more and more popular. Let's put it on the board real quick. G3. Yeah, I still don't have a strong opinion. I think, well, I've mentioned this earlier. I do believe that this line with b5, knight e5, a6, this was all the rage for a while, intending knight c6, queen b6. I think this is in a bit of trouble because of this castle's bishop b7, b3 idea Kramnik used against Giri. That looked quite nice for white to me. So I'm not surprised that Anand would deviate. This line Vishy played, I'm not a major specialist. I agree with what you said, that the ending they reached after some very sharp forced line looked a bit more pleasant for white, or at least that's what the computer said. But normally one can trust Vishy with those things that he's went even deeper here. Yeah, all of this stuff is of course crazy computer stuff, but those guys know what they're doing here. They reached this very complicated endgame where, yeah, my computer says white is a bit better here after rook e1, but I wouldn't be surprised if Vishy went deep enough to know he's not in trouble here, or even his counterplay. So yeah, it seems like even here there's some hope for white to get an edge, and I'm also curious, I haven't seen a high-level outing, or a recent high-level outing on the move bishop e7, which is the old main line, and this was always my repertoire, and I thought this was sort of fine for black as well. So I'd be a bit curious what they have in mind here. I don't see anything particularly wrong with it, but certainly g3 is a line to keep an eye on now that this b5 a6 idea is under pressure and black is looking for new ways. I expect it to get only more popular, and I might have to pick it up myself one day. That's my current opinion at least. Hope that helped. Sorry. Okay, we've done 2 hours. These were all the questions I had. I'll update. I'm sure there's some more during the show. I can't answer all of those, but I'll have a brief look. If something catches the eye, I'll get to it. Now, maybe there's no more questions. That'd be great. No, I like answering the questions. I just want to make my movie, so apologies. Oh, there's myself. Beautiful. If I do sound like I really want to get out of here. It's warm, though. Oh, yeah, there's a lot more questions. Let's read through them, but don't expect me to put in a lot of effort. If you want me to be serious about them, post them a little before the show begins. Normally I stop my preparation, whatever, half an hour before the show. But yeah, let's have a quick look. Blinder says, hi Jan, thank you for smoking. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be funny. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, queen c2, castles, a3, bishop c3, queen c3, d5, knight f3, dc, queen c4, b6, bishop g5, bishop a6, queen c2, h6, takes, queen takes c7, the best move. Your take on 12 g3, c5. I don't get the question, Blinder. I'll try to put the position on the board, but I'm not sure I understand the question. You're saying queen takes c7 is the best move, but what is my take on g3 instead? This is a line I really haven't kept track of because I've decided that black was fine, basically. How to go here? Here takes b6. So I have to cheat. I can't even remember. I'm gonna have to look it up again. Sorry. b6. Okay, let's say f3. Okay. Bishop a6, queen c2. Is this how they play? h6 here? Not that familiar with this line, but looks a bit strange, doesn't it? I'm really not updated. h6 takes. Now this looks vaguely familiar though. Queen takes c7, the best move. Was that a claim or a question? No, queen c7 is a mistake. I think rook c8 and rook c2, and black gets too active. And yeah, g3, c5 also seems fine for black. That's my take on it. I think I once looked at this line and I wanted e3 or something, which also is fine for black. No, looks fine. I'm sorry. I'm not very up to date in this stuff. Would have had to look at it a bit more. So yeah, queen takes c7, rook c8. And yeah, it seems to me like black is very active. And g3, c5 also seems fine for black. dc, rook c8. What do? They don't play this move order, right? After d5. Yeah, I think nowadays they start with bishop g5, dc, queen c4, b6. I wish I could remember. Bishop a6. Maybe they go queen a4 here. I think this was the trendy line, right? Not queen c2. I'm really not very up to date. I decided black is fine here. Queen a4. Yeah, queen d7 or c5 or anything. And queen c2. You could very well be right that h6 is a good move. But I don't know. I'm sorry. Slevin Kilevra is asking, hi Jan, what do you recommend against 1 d4 c5? I recommend the move d5, but I think d takes c5 is also interesting. Jan Gustafsson, excellent name and profile, much appreciated. Hi there, do you think that 4h4 is a viable line for white in the Grunfeld to hope for an advantage? No, it's not. Anyway, he gives a line later, but no, 4h4 is not very good. But 5h4 is playable. The problem with 4h4 is that c5 is good for black here. After dc5, d4, knight b5, e5. And I think white is already struggling to equalize, so there's no reason to go bishop g7 here. The move you mentioned, when white is probably fine. What's a lot more interesting is knight f3, bishop g7, and now h4. Because now after c5, dc5, there's no more d4. So this is quite playable, and we've seen a lot of strong players play this, Nakamura and the likes. Yeah, I think c6 is the safest move here, while d takes c4 is very interesting and leads to a crazy play after e4, c5, d5, b5. So that's possible, but 4h4 is just bad, in my opinion, after c5. Ted Lawyer is saying, Jan, thanks for all your great work on Chess24. Yeah, thanks. I enjoy being a premium member immensely. Thanks, glad to hear it. Tell your friends. I have a question regarding the Budapest defense gambit. After d4, knight f6, c4, e5, de, knight g4, bishop f4, bishop c5, e3, knight c6, knight f3, queen e7. What is the best way for white to retain an edge? Thanks in advance for your response. Once again, my main answer is, why do you need a way to keep an edge? You already have the two bishops and are better. So yeah, this is a very playable line. You don't see it much at a higher level, mainly because black doesn't equalize. So after bishop f4, if they play this, normally they try g5 here. But it's also not very good. After bishop g3, white is better as well. So knight c6, knight f3, bishop b4, knight bd2. I think knight c3 is also interesting, by the way. But knight bd2, queen e7, e3, takes. Yeah, you go bishop e2. They castle, you castle. And now it sort of depends on black's move. But normally black takes on d2 deliberately and goes d6. When I think white is a wide, pleasant choice here. I'm not sure what the best move is. I think white is better with pretty much every move. b4, queen to c3. The immediate c5 now. Maybe not the immediate c5. I'd probably play something like queen c3 and be quite pleased with myself, because white is the two bishops and the better structure and the safer king because of this 4 against 3 on the king side. So this is, yeah, a position I'd be thrilled to play. And that's all I know about it, but I'm delighted to play it. I don't know, sometimes I think black tries to delay this capture and go d6, but then knight b3, white is also better. So, yeah, I don't know much, but I think white is just seriously better with the two bishops and the better structure, so there is not that much to worry about. g5 is the move you want to be a bit more ready for, but then I think both bishop g3 and bishop d2 lead to an edge as well. So the Budapest is solid, but it's not that scary. Max Orto. Hi Jan, please could you give us some ideas for white in the Makogonov variation of the King's Indian Defense? Thank you, Max. Become a premium member, Max, then you get this little flag and then I can answer your question. Right now I can't, I'm sorry, it's only for premium members. Maybe US should try checkers, no offense. Oh, that might be a dangerous statement in the near future. What is the best way for white against the Budapest Farajovic variant? d4, knight f6, c4, e5, de, knight e4. Or maybe you should not take the pawn on e5? No, you should take the pawn on e5. I don't know, seems like a lot of interest in the Budapest all of a sudden. Knight e4. I don't know, I think there's a couple refutations. I haven't studied it for a while. I think a3 is supposed to be one of them, more or less, leading to a clear edge for white. Me, because I'm lazy, I've normally played something like g3 here. Or have I played g3? g3, bishop b4, knight bd2. Something like this, giving the pawn back. And white is also seriously better. So, yeah, the Farajovic is not very good. It's one of these things I've never really studied. If I see someone plays it, I'm going to prepare for it. And I'm going to be very confident in my preparation. But you should certainly take the pawn. And here, I think a3 is more or less supposed to be the refutation. I've normally played this because... I can't remember my move order. Probably I started with this. I can't remember, I think I was doing this, and now g3, queen e7, bishop g2, knight e5 castles. And white has a pretty significant edge as well. Knight takes d2. Also, even knight takes d2 is better for white, but also bishop takes. Bishop takes, queen takes. Let's say d6. Okay, pretty significant edge. Might be a bit of a stretch, but white is better here. b3 castles, whatever, knight d4. And black doesn't get a lot of the fun that he was probably hoping to get when gambiting the pawn. Instead, he just gets a worse position. That's one of the problems you have as a modern-day gambitier. People are quite often willing to return the pawn. And yeah, like I said, I haven't looked up any refutations. Queen c2 is probably also good, but it's not an opening to be afraid of. And yeah, out of laziness, I've always played knight f3, knight d2, g3. What else we got? Tin Cup. How many more questions? No offense, I just got a movie to make. Hi Jan, greetings from Greece. No worries, we still love German people. Good to hear. In the line d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3. I always thought the move bishop f5 was dubious, and it is, because of cd, cd, queen b3. Yup. However, I recently encountered an opponent who employs the move knight takes d5 and went on playing knight d2, e5, e4, blah, blah. Knight c3, bc, bishop e6, knight f3. I probably misjudged ed, queen a5, and finally won a long game. Congratulations, but I wasn't convinced by my handling of the opening. What would you suggest as the best line for white after knight takes d5? Thanks, keep up the good work. I will, but not much longer today. So d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, bishop f5. This is a mistake. C takes d, and knight takes d5. Yeah, this is better than cd, which more or less loses after queen b3, or loses a pawn at least. Here white, I think, has a choice. Queen b3 is still better for white, but then queen b6 is not that clear. Knight d5, queen b3, and okay, black might be able to survive this endgame, even though it's certainly no great fun either. I'm not sure how much it is. What I would do, once again, this might be a bit of a lazy solution, but I think e3 is a decent move here. Black goes e6, you go bishop d3, black takes, queen takes, then you castle, then you go e4, and you're better. So I'm not sure this is the pushing the hardest. Frankly, it's probably not, and maybe what you played, knight d2, is also interesting. But yeah, I think both e3 and queen b3 lead to an edge, and it's also a line I don't think you're gonna see ever again, because it's just not a very good line. So I wouldn't worry about it. I would probably play e3 and then bishop d3 to take it from there. All right, 2 more questions, then I'm calling it a day. Wizard D is saying, hi Jan, what is your opinion on d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, bishop g5, castles, f4? I've never seen that one. Is that a line? It looks a bit over-aggressive. But let's have a look, why not? d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, bishop g5, castles, f4. Oh no, I have seen that one. I used to look at this. I couldn't make it work, but obviously I can't remember why. I don't know, c5 looks normal. What do you do then? d5? Because dc5, I'm assuming queen a5, or even dc5 recapturing. Does queen a5 work? Yeah, this seems to work as well. cd, knight e4. So I'm guessing your idea is d5, and now, isn't this a problem? Like, I'm really freestyling here. I haven't looked at this line, but it looks a little clumsy from the white, or not clumsy, but a little overextended from the white perspective. I'm not sure if knight h5 is a move, or if something crazy like knight g4 works, or if black should play a more normal move like queen a5 followed by e6. I honestly don't know. Could be a good surprise weapon. I can't recall what I looked at here, but I'd be very surprised if it was good. I'll look it up though, I'm curious, but the question reaches me too late to be ready for it. My best guess would be c5, d5, and now some funky knight move like this. Does this work? Playing to go here, queen d2, bishop d4. Not sure. I don't trust it, but it's certainly interesting. I'll have a look. Thanks. And the last question. What is your preferred setup as black against the London system? Thanks. I don't know what the London system is. I'm assuming it's something with d4, knight f3, bishop f4. But yeah, once again, it depends on what opening you typically play as black. In general, yeah, I've mentioned this many times, and this is my approach to chess. It's not meant as criticism. I'm not a big believer in systems, I'm a believer in moves. So I'm much more comfortable if you give me a position. If you say knight f3 and I want to play d5 here, but I'm scared of bishop f4, then I can make more of it. Because the London system, I'm not sure if you mean that against the King's Indian, people play this system, which I think this is the London system. I'm honestly not sure. I'm not good with names. Or against e6, so I'm not quite sure. This setup, yeah, this line I've played with black once in a while when I saw white was doing this. I was always happy to go here. I think black has a couple of decent systems. I think I was playing with c5 here, and I was quite happy with myself. There's also other approaches, like knight fd7 followed by e5. In general, I don't think it's that great a system, but certainly playable. If they play with d5, bishop f4, then I go c5, e3, knight c6. This line I know, and yeah, I'd be reasonably happy here as well. c3, knight b6 is fine for black, and so is everything else. The only line, yeah, where it would bother me a little bit, or I wouldn't know it, but I don't play this move all that much, is after e6. Oh, I'm sorry, I should switch to full board. e6, bishop f4. Here I think this is a more serious version, and I've never looked at it in this setup, so I'm not quite sure what I would play here. Probably something slow and boring with b6, bishop b7, bishop e7, castles, and take it from there. But here I wouldn't be sure, but against both g6 or d5 I wouldn't take the London system very seriously. So I'm not sure that answers your question, and I'm also not sure what the London system is, but that's my take on systems with bishop f4. That's it for today. Thanks everybody for watching and listening. Sorry for my slight rush and terrible mood in the end. No, I'm in a good mood. I just gotta get out of here, and it's really warm. I hoped I could help with something in general. Yeah, what's the best line against that and that is always a tough question, but still, it's been a blast, and I'll see you guys for opening clinic number 8 at some point in the future. Thanks everybody for watching, for listening, for kibitzing. I'm sorry I can never follow the chat with these shows because it's too busy answering all the questions. I'll see you next time.